Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Anya Taylor-Joy and Daniel Radcliffe venture into the colourful animated world of Playmobil the Movie. Marla, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, and her brother Charlie, played by Gabriel Bateman, are sucked by a magic lighthouse into the world of Playmobil, becoming toy figures of themselves, with Charlie being turned into a super strong Viking. When Charlie is captured by Emperor Maximus, voiced by Adam Lambert, who is kidnapping formidable warriors to do battle in his Colosseum, Marla races to find him, getting the help of food delivery truck driver Dale, voiced by Jim Gaffigan, so they can be reunited and get back home. If you're anything like me, you might remember that when the Lego Movie was first announced, you probably greeted it with skepticism, if not outright cynicism. Oh, they're making a movie about a toy? How crassly commercial. And yet, when that film came out, we all had to eat humble pie, because what Lord and Miller did with that property was nothing short of genius. It was fast, clever and creative. It was the best parts of the toy that it was based on, and it worked as such for kids and adults. And it was more than simply just a merchandising opportunity, which it also totally was, by the way, and it spawned a very lucrative franchise. Although, judging by the lukewarm returns of the Lego Movie 2 earlier this year at the box office, it does seem like the novelty has already worn off. Nevertheless, that hasn't stopped other toy companies watching the success of the Lego Movie with greedy, envious eyes and saying, we'd like a little bit of that too, please. And thus we have imitations like the Emoji Movie, or the forthcoming Barbie movie, or today's subject, Playmobil the Movie, which of course comes from Lego's main competitor and arrives 5 years too late to really capitalise on it. The film marks the directorial debut of Lino Di Salvo, who previously worked for Disney for 17 years. He was the head of animation on Frozen, which sounds like a big coup for this movie, and clearly the brief was to try and recapture the success of the Lego Movie in any way, shape or form. And honestly, watching this is a good way of seeing how the Lego Movie could have gone wrong, because the difference is that the Lego Movie doesn't feel like an advert for toys the entire time. Playmobil the Movie, though, absolutely does. It's genuinely hard to watch this film without thinking of the Lego Movie every single step of the way. Not just because you know exactly where it came from, but because there's so many similarities between them. It's always inviting that comparison in your mind, and on that front, Playmobil's always going to be the loser. At times, it really does seem like the creative team watched the Lego Movie and drew up a checklist of all the things that they wanted to duplicate here. So, for example, like the Lego Movie, this is a live-action CG hybrid. The difference being that, unlike the earlier film, this isn't a big twist deep into the third act. Instead, Playmobil's very upfront about it. It bookends the film. The first 10 to 15 minutes at the start are live action and the last 5, and everything in between is the animated segments. And I guess that's suitably different enough, but there's also the fact that in terms of narrative structure, the films also echo each other quite a lot, because in terms of the way that they progress, it's going from world to world to world. And to a certain extent, you can excuse that, because obviously, if you're making a movie about a toy line that has various different ranges, you want to incorporate that into the plot mechanics of the story, but nevertheless, despite that, they still function in very much the same way, in that every time they go into a new world, it changes genre slightly. And not helping that is that you have a Western setting, which, funnily enough, follows directly after a car chase sequence, which is exactly how it works in the Lego Movie, and roughly in a similar spot, narrative-wise, as well. That's really a little bit too close for comfort, in my opinion. I do actually like some of the worlds that they've developed into the film. There is some creativity there. For example, there's a sci-fi world which is pretty much an excuse for the filmmakers to do Star Wars, right down to the fact that they've got a female Jabba the Hutt character that Dell is indebted to and he ends up in trouble with. And the spy movie section is the best part of the film because it has the most action in it, it has the most jokes that land. It's also the part of the film where they clearly watched the Lego Movie and said to themselves, we need a Batman, and by that I mean we need a breakout secondary comic character. Enter Daniel Radcliffe as Rex Dasher. Now I know what you're probably thinking, isn't that very close to Rex Danger from the Lego Movie 2? And right you are, but given these two movies were probably in production at exactly the same time, we'll just chalk that one up to a coincidence. Otherwise though, he does function exactly like Batman in the Lego Movie, in that this is meant to be a send-up of James Bond, the only difference being is they don't have the official license. Nevertheless, Radcliffe is clearly enjoying himself here, getting to send up that character, fully aware that he's never going to be playing James Bond in reality. That's just not going to happen for him. So he just goes all out here, and like Batman in the Lego films, he's slick, he's stylish, but he's also vain, arrogant, and comically overconfident, and he always presumes that Marla is falling in love with him when clearly she's rolling her eyes. And Radcliffe is amusing, but he's only in the movie relatively briefly for mostly this stretch. He has about 10 minutes of screen time and enters in about 40 minutes into it, but clearly the filmmakers and especially the advertisers knew that he was a major marketable element, to the point where the US trailer makes it seem like he's the main character and the plot is all about him. Do not trust that trailer. It's one of the most misleading ads I think I've seen in recent memory. It is in no way a truthful depiction of what any of the movie is about. You'd be best left watching the trailer that played in the UK, which is a much more accurate version of the film's plot. Radcliffe is only a very small part of the movie. But the other reason that you find yourself mentally accounting it to the Lego Movie is that Playmobil never finds its own identity. It always feels very generic, especially in the story department, so you do it to pass the time. And I actually quite like the hook that they have in this film of characters being sucked from the real world into the Playmobil world. I think in the right hands, you could do something quite clever with that, but this isn't it. And right from the opening, this has big problems. We don't even get to the animated section before it drops a major clanger, in that at the opening credits, we discover that Marla and Charlie's parents have been killed in a car crash off screen, which is unnecessarily dark for what is meant to be a lightweight children's adventure. It feels very much like the writers had a list of children's media cliches and ticked the big box that said dead parents, rather than actually serving the story. If you're going to do something like this, you need to follow through on it. You need to confront grief over the course of the running time. But of course, you're not going to do that because you're the Playmobil Movie. So as soon as they go into the animated section, it's mostly forgotten about. But the only reason it's there is because they need something to drive a wedge between brother and sister. When we meet Marla at the beginning of the film, she's just turned 18. She's got pink highlights in her hair and she's got a brand new passport, and she's excited to use it. She wants to travel all around the world. She's excited about all of life's possibilities, and then they're all taken away from her. And then we skip ahead 4 years and we realise that she's been forced to take on responsibility. She has to look after her younger brother, and it's taken its toll on her. She's had to put all of her dreams on hold, and naturally, when the adventure kicks in, she has to loosen up. She has to rediscover her sense of fun, her sense of exploration, her sense of playfulness. What it essentially boils down to is a follow your dreams narrative that we've seen numerous times in movies like this. It's very, very stock, but the movie thinks it's telling something a lot more significant than it really is, especially in the way that it never lets you forget about that passport. It's Chekhov's passport. Every time that they can push it into a scene, they will do, just in case you forgot the linkage with the opening section. I think that Anya Taylor-Joy really is a bright spot. Anyone who's been following her since The Witch knows that she's a hugely promising performer, and I have no idea why she's in this film. She's way better than being in a Playmobil movie, but nevertheless, she fully fully commits to it. And you know what? Hats off to her, because she was definitely the thing that made this watchable for me. She's great in the live action sections, and her voice acting is really good as well. I think that her performance as Marla is easily the best thing about the film for me. And alongside you've got Gabrielle Bateman as Charlie, and this is actually his second film about toys this year, because he appeared in the recent remake of Child's Play as Andy, which needless to say is a very different film about the subject. The problem with Charlie as a character, though, is that he spends most of the film captured, so he gets very little to do, to the point where the movie actually has to invent padding to give him some kind of agency. There's this little subplot where him and the other warriors break out of prison, but it goes absolutely nowhere. It just fills out time. And you would have thought, given that they put him in this super strong Viking body, would explore that juxtaposition. They would confront the fact that underneath it, he's a scared, vulnerable, frightened kid, and link that with the theme of grief. But no, of course, the movie never goes at that head on. It feels like a really wasted opportunity. And while I think about it, even the setup of how they end up in the Playmobil world doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They go to a toy fair and they have this Playmobil exhibition, and then suddenly the lighthouse is magical and sucks them inside because I guess the Playmobil decided that they need to learn a lesson. It just feels really half thought out in a lot of ways. Filling out the rest of the voice cast, you've got Jim Gaffigan as Dell, who between this and Duck Duck Goose appears to be cornering the market on mediocre animated films for easy paychecks, but I think that he's better cast here than he was in Duck Duck Goose. I don't think he's likeable enough to carry a movie in the lead role, but he works perfectly well here as the slacker sidekick, and honestly, there are some shades of Emmett in terms of his characterization, but that could just be because I was really looking for it. They clearly hired a comedian because they wanted to punch up the jokes. A lot of the gags here are really quite weak. They fall flat even for the younger members of the audience, but there's only so much he can do with this, and that especially goes for Kenan Thompson as one of the captured warriors, Bloodbones. But again, because he spends most of the movie inside a small cell, he barely gets anything to do. And Thompson is such a great comic performer that he can usually make something out of very, very little. That's why he makes so many appearances in animated films, but even this gives him so little to work with. If I had to give a credit to this film, the animation is very strong. Aside from a goof where they misspell Pompeii on a sign, this is bright, lively, and very, very colourful. I liked looking at it. It was very appealing in that regard, and the film is made by the French-based ON Animation Studios, who are probably best known for their film The Little Prince, but also especially for the TV show Miraculous, and this is of much the same quality. The issue with the animation, like everything else, is that you're always comparing it to the Lego Movie, and in the Lego Movie, they made the toy the heart of the aesthetic. If you couldn't do it with the figures, then the characters in the film didn't animate that way. And as such, when they needed quick movements, they often replaced bits of the figures with other blocks. And you can only see that really if you go frame by frame. You barely register that with your eyes, but that shows the level of attention to detail that everyone put on the Lego Movie, in that clearly it was crafted with love, right down to the little tiny details of fingerprints and scuff marks. And Playmobil doesn't try to do that, which is perhaps a conscious effort on the filmmaker's part, but it does feel disappointing because you would have thought they'd try and attempt to do their own take on something like that, but maybe it was deemed just too close in that regard. So instead of the figures moving in the way that their counterparts often do, where they have straight arms and straight legs, instead they bend, which is maybe a little bit distracting if you know the toy well. And it is also a little bit jarring because when Marla is first transported into the world and she's getting used to this new body, she actually moves that way. And then in the same scene, it's immediately forgotten about. If you're going to make a joke about a human adapting to this new body, you would have thought they'd at least continued that or try to make it a little less obvious that they were immediately disregarding it, but that's not the only thing they cheat on, because if you pick up a Playmobil figure, you'll know they have extremely basic faces. They're essentially just smiley faces with big black eyes. Needless to say, for the film, they've changed that because 1, that would have been intensely creepy, but also 2, they need them to be a lot more expressive, hence the pupils, and they need them to be more distinct from each other, which is fair enough. And in the case of Charlie and Marla, they need to seem more human in some ways, and that definitely works on that level, but it gives you a sense they're not as beholden to the toy as they were on the Lego Movie, which speaks, in my opinion, to something much larger, in that I don't think there is as much love for Playmobil as there is for Lego in general. When I was growing up, I didn't play with a lot of Playmobil. I know that that might be different from person to person. There's probably people that have very fond memories of Playmobil, but I feel like that's a much smaller segment of the audience. If they're trying to connect with adult nostalgia in the same way the Lego Movie did, it feels like they're really going to struggle, and it does feel like, to a certain extent, that they haven't created something as visually distinctive as they did on the obvious inspiration. You might also be surprised to hear that this is a musical, totally unnecessarily in my opinion, and it doesn't feel like the film entirely commits to that approach, in that there's only about 4 or 5 songs across the running time, and there's long stretches where it goes without. It does feel like they might have been pushed in later as a way of appealing to the pop stars they have in some of the supporting roles. For example, Deus Ex Meghan Trainor turns up in the 3rd act as fairy godmother, and she's essentially there just to wish Marla along to where the plot needs her to, and sing a song as she does so. The problem with the songs in this film is that they are really junky, overproduced pop songs that you would hear on the Disney Channel. They're very kids boppy. I can see a lot of older viewers really grating with these. I was warned ahead of time that it was a musical, so I was definitely braced for it, but they're still not very good, to say the least. Speaking of not very good, can we talk about Adam Lambert? He voices the villain of the movie, Emperor Maximus, and he goes so far over the top in this role, and not in a good way. His performance as the childlike dictator is really obnoxious. Someone should have told him to maybe just dial it down a bit, and he gets the worst song in the film. He gets the "I'm the villain, so I'm going to explain my motivations, but I'm doing it as a song for some completely random reason. Oh yeah, because we cast Lambert in the role. That's why. This villain is not intimidating, he's not amusing, he's just a complete annoyance all the way through the film. You always find yourself wishing that he was off screen. But I think it really does say something about Playmobil the movie that the best musical number is in the live action segment, because opening up the film, you've got Anya Taylor-Joy actually singing a song about how much she wants to travel the world, and that whole set piece is better staged, better sung than anything else in the rest of the movie. It's certainly the most memorable song, but I do have to admit that that might just be because immediately following that very hyper-happy number, Dead Parents. I would have been able to look past Playmobil the movie being derivative if it was fun on its own terms, but it's not. It's uninspired and actually quite boring in places. And I should have been an easy mark for this. I love the Lego Movie so much that I would have gladly taken something else in the same vein, but this is far below them. It's not funny enough, it's not sharp enough, and it clearly isn't remotely geared towards adults. It's very much pointed at children and is obviously meant to be a soulless product. It is the merchandising opportunity that you feared the Lego Movie would purely be. It's there so that they can want the toys afterwards. If you have younger viewers, they might get some entertainment out of this, but I think even those might be able to recognise that this isn't anywhere close to the Lego movies, to the point where, similarly, if you gave them the choice between Lego and Playmobil, chances are they'd probably take the Lego instead. And that's exactly what you should probably do with this movie. If you have any interest in showing your kids this, Just show the Lego Movie. It's a far better version of it. And also, on one final note, who are you kidding with your post-credits scene? Who in their right mind thinks that this is going to get a sequel? It is rather obvious to say that Playmobil the Movie lives in the shadow of the Lego Movie, but that doesn't make it any less true, as it tries to recapture that film's formula with many similar elements, but minus the creative spark that elevated that beyond its purely commercial ambitions. Despite the efforts of Anya Taylor-Joy or Daniel Radcliffe gamely making fun of James Bond, it isn't nearly as fun as its inspiration, as the writing and jokes are uninspired and generic, not helped by the fact that Brand likely doesn't have the same kind of nostalgic appeal for adults. Even the animation, though decent in its own right, doesn't use the toy's characteristics as a form, and the gratingly poppy musical numbers are largely unnecessary to a film that doesn't seem to have a genuine affinity for what it's supposedly bringing to life, and really is for kids only. If you like this review, then you can support me over at Patreon, where you can find my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.